Welcome inside the War Room. I'm your host, Andrew Valancourt, and we're back today for episode 33 of the Dynasty War Room podcast. On today's show, we're going to talk about some buy low targets. So I've gone through and identified 5 players at each position that I think are good buy low targets right now. Most of these players have gotten off to a bit of a slow start, but I still think provide you with some pretty good value, especially with their dip in value here after the first couple weeks of the season. So as we move into things, teams are starting to identify whether they are contenders, whether they're rebuilding teams, and picking a direction to go. So these players on today's episode should give you some good trade targets to keep in mind that won't cost you a lot as you move forward into the season. So before we jump into that though, I just want to remind everyone, as always, go give us a follow on whatever platform you're listening to the show on. We're on every platform that carries podcasts. Go give us a follow on Twitter. We're at Dynasty War Room, and you can give us a like on Facebook and subscribe on YouTube as well at Dynasty War Room there. So we appreciate that. You can leave us a 5-star review. All that helps the show out a lot, so I really appreciate it. And with that being said, let's just kick it off with some quarterbacks. So, like I said, 5 players at each position that I think are buy low candidates. So most of these players, pretty rough start to the season. There's a few players, not so much at quarterback, but running back and some of the other positions, a player or two that have had a nice start to the season, but are still viewed as a very low cost option. So if you're a team that, is looking for some depth, is looking for somebody to help fill out your lineup as bye weeks start to approach, we got some candidates for that as well. So starting at quarterback, first guy on this list is somebody that I talked up a lot in the offseason, and he's gotten off to a bit of a rough start, and that's Jared Goff, quarterback of the Detroit Lions. On Keep Trade Cut, he's being valued as the QB 18, 66 player overall, and Goff has been bad. Like I said, first 2 games of the year, he's only thrown 1 touchdown pass. He's had 3 interceptions, but he does play all but 3 games the rest of the season in a dome, where he does play much better. He's got 2 weaker defenses coming up in Arizona and Seattle these next 2 games, so that should give him a nice bounce back opportunity, which I think makes him a great buy low candidate for a contender that needs a QB2. We saw how good he could be last year. The Lions offense clearly is not clicking all the way yet. We've seen some flashes, but some red zone struggles, things like that. Jared Goff did throw for over 300 yards last week. They really aired it out. So I do expect this offense to improve, and Goff should, especially given that he's fallen a bit to start the season, is somebody that you can add as a contender and will give you some nice depth at a bare minimum, but I certainly view him as a QB2 that you should be starting in a Superflex league. Next up on the list, we actually have 2 guys who are currently injured, which you might think is interesting for a player that you'd want to be trading for. However, these 2 players are specifically buy low targets in the context of if you're a rebuilding team. So a lot of leagues, well, regardless of whether your league goes by just overall record for your rookie draft or you go by max points scored, and the first pick goes to the team with the lowest maximum points scored in the season. Either way, JJ McCarthy, QB 19, player 67 overall. He is somebody that helps you if you're a rebuilding team. He doesn't hurt your ability to get the number 1 pick because he's not playing at all this year. But he is somebody that I was high on as a rookie. I was drafting him in the top 6 of rookie drafts, and the injury is really unfortunate. He's out for the season. However, he gets to learn on the sideline. Sam Darnold has been playing very well. And so I think this works out to actually be a pretty good situation for JJ McCarthy because he's going to learn. He's going to be able to soak everything in. He probably needed some time on the sideline anyways. So this, it would have been nice if he could practice at least, but he'll be in his second year just from an understanding the system perspective in 2025. And with how well Darnold has played in this same system, I feel very confident that J.J. McCarthy can be a very good NFL starting quarterback. So he's probably not going to cost you a mid to early first-round pick. I think that you could get away with a package built around other assets or a late first. So given that, I think that that's worth it. And it's just something where we've seen how bad the quarterback play has been around the league, and Minnesota has been one of the few teams where we surprisingly have not had to deal with that. So I am encouraged by that. There's good weapons, and that makes J.J. McCarthy a buy low target. Next up is Tua Tagovailoa, who, as I mentioned, there were going to be two players on this list who were injured. Tua is one of them, and of course, we all saw he sustained another concussion. He's being valued as the QB 23 and a 102 overall. So it's sort of an interesting scenario because there's a camp of people that believe that Tua is going to retire. I am not one of those people. I do not think he was going to retire. I think that he's going to take his month on IR. He's going to talk to doctors. He's going to recover. Maybe it'll take, a couple extra weeks. But I do believe he will be back this season. I do believe that he will be the starting quarterback for this team when the year finishes. And I believe he's going to be the starting quarterback for the Miami Dolphins in 2025. So given that, this was a player that was being talked about as, QB 15, QB 14, like somebody in those mid-teens before the season. So obviously with him missing a good chunk of time this year, that does knock his fantasy value down a little bit. However, you got people out there that truly believe he will retire or that he will never, he played poorly in the game last week. So kind of leaves a bad taste in your mouth on top of the injury. This is a really good time to try to just completely swindle your Tua manager in your leagues, because I do think that people are scared in general to be left holding the bag on players. But when you're talking about a quarterback on one of the elite offenses with an elite offensive head coach, I want to have that quarterback. And, he's not priced high enough that you're going to have to give up a first round pick anymore, like you would have a couple weeks ago. So if you can get him for, pretty much, you just ask the manager what they're looking for. And I bet it's going to be less than you probably think, unless it's me. But unfortunately, I actually don't think I have Tua in any of my leagues. But if I did, I probably would not be looking to trade him because of where he is in the cycle of value. I just think it's at a low point. I try to avoid trading players when they're at that low point. And that's where Tua is. So if you can afford to have somebody on your bench that's not going to be playing for a month or two, and you have the assets to go get another quarterback, I think this is a good buy low opportunity for a player who has shown that he can be a very good NFL quarterback when healthy, which of course is a bit of a caveat here. But again, I'm willing to take that risk because it's not going to cost anywhere near as much as it would have just a couple of weeks ago. Next up is Justin Fields, who has been starting so far this year for the Pittsburgh Steelers. He's being valued as the QB 24 and 106th overall. And Justin Fields has really not been that good for fantasy, which is a bit surprising given, the way we've seen him play before where, he just racks up those rushing yards and whatnot. But it does make a bit of sense. He's in a bit more of a structured system in Pittsburgh. It's not, going to be some high-flying, high-powered offense. However, he's been fairly solid in terms of actually being the real-life starter for the Steelers. And so that means, he's 2-0. He's going to start again in week 3. And so I think this means that if he continues to play well, this job is going to be his for the rest of the season. Russell Wilson will not take this job away as long as this team continues to win, as long as Fields continues to take care of the ball. And eventually Justin Fields is going to start finding the end zone. He's already, he's been running, not as much as he did in Chicago, but still enough to give you a nice boost in fantasy. And he's not turning the ball over. So I think that the pieces are there. George Pickens looks like he's taken the next step. Pat Freiermuth has been solid. There's a lack of weapons elsewhere on this offense, but it's going to be, focused on the running game and whatnot. But I do feel that for QB24 value, there are a lot of managers who probably still think that Russell Wilson is going to take this job back, or they just don't want to be stuck dealing with the question every week of who's going to play. So for those reasons, I think that Justin Fields is a pretty good buy low target. And last but not least, and I cannot even believe that I'm saying this, but Deshaun Watson, who I have been a known hater of all year on this show, I think is a perfectly fine buy low candidate right now. He's QB 33 on Keep Trade Cut, 168th overall, and that is so low for a starting quarterback. Gardner Minshew is ahead of him. Bryce Young is still ahead of him. Deshaun Watson has been terrible, and he's been pretty much exactly what I thought he would be. But I don't know that he is truly QB 33 bad in terms of what he can do for your fantasy team. He is QB 13 in scoring, and that's with 2 pretty bad games. He's shown that he can still run the ball, and I think he's a pretty solid third, a depth quarterback in a superflex league for a contending team. And the beauty is he's not going to cost you more than a third-round pick in most scenarios because nobody wants him. Between his off-the-field issues and just Cleveland's offense being dreadful in general, people are really, really sour on Deshaun Watson. Myself included. I don't particularly like Deshaun Watson for a whole number of reasons, but if you're talking about somebody that can be a cheap, buy low option, Deshaun Watson fits that bill because I don't think he's going anywhere, certainly not this year. The contract presents a barrier to getting rid of him in general. So I really don't know that he is going to lose the starting job next year. He would have to probably just get worse and worse as time goes on, if that's, possible. But if he just marginally improves, you're talking about somebody that can, provide you a solid baseline of fantasy scoring. And I think that's, something good to have as a contender. And so for this cheap, considering there is still upside, this is a player that has done it before, even though I don't think he's going to ever return to being any sort of top 10 quarterback. If he can give you backup level, QB3 on a contender, of course, I'm not talking literally, QB 30 scoring overall, but, if he can be somebody that you can trust to plug in a bye week, I think that's a pretty good player to have on your roster as a contender. Now, on the flip side, even if you're a rebuilding team, because the cost is so cheap, if you are willing to take the risk and just assume that Cleveland can't get out of this contract, flipping a third-round pick for him is not necessarily the worst case for a rebuilding team either, because as long as he does play next year, again, he should provide some sort of depth value to your team. All right, so let's move on over to the running backs. So I do have 5 running backs picked out, and this is where a couple of the players have, this is really the only position, I should say, where these players are not ones who have necessarily struggled to begin the year, but I do think they are all still players that you can get for very cheap or at least very affordable given their production and their potential moving forward. So starting off, my first trade target at running back is going to be Tony Pollard of the Tennessee Titans. Now, he's being valued as the running back 25, 95th player overall, and he's not, like I said, he's not really a buy low guy because he has played very well to start the season, but his value has not really increased that much despite the workload, despite the fantasy points. He's the clear number 1 running back in Tennessee. Tajay Spears, to me, is somebody that I think you can sell. There's still people that believe in the hype that he's going to, end up in this full committee with Tony Pollard. I don't see that happening. Tony Pollard has always been the back in this offense that I've wanted to have on my rosters. And, it's panning out that way. He's the number 12 running back on the season through 2 weeks. And the coaching staff, I don't really think they trust Will Levis. So this is going to be a situation where Pollard is going to continue to get the ball. And I think if you're a team that needs either an RB2 because of injuries, or you need an RB3, somebody you can put in your flex, this is that guy. You can start Tony Pollard on a weekly basis. This is not just somebody to fill in, on a bye week. So Tony Pollard, running back 25, I think he makes a very good trade candidate at this point in the season. Next up is a rookie, Bucky Irving, the Tampa Bay Bucks. He's being valued as the running back 31, 113th overall. And his value, I think, has increased a bit to start the season. However, I still don't think the cost is going to be all that pricey. It'll be a little bit more than where he was drafted in your rookie draft, which was probably somewhere in the mid-third round. But Rachaad White has been very mediocre. He's been banged up a little bit. And Bucky Irving has looked pretty good in the chances that he's received. Detroit has a very good run defense, and they were able to stifle him a bit. But this is a situation that could turn into a full committee as we get deeper into the year. So if you're a White manager, I would be a little bit worried. I would, poke around, see if Irving is available. Otherwise, I think it's a situation where as you get into the next few weeks, I always like to say that probably after week 6, you should have a very good idea of whether you are a buyer or a seller. And if you are not looking like a playoff team by week 6, I think Rachaad White is somebody that you should really be looking to trade away. Or if you already know now that you don't think you're going to make the playoffs, moving on from somebody like this, a volatile position, doing so is better to do it now than later. But Bucky Irving, there's a future for him in this offense, and now is a good time to buy before that price goes up even more. Next up is probably my favorite cheap running back buy, and that's Devin Singletary of the New York Giants. He's running back 40, 136th overall. I mentioned him a bit throughout the summer because he was somebody that I liked, and he's getting a lot of work. He can catch passes. He's running back 25 overall in the season. We saw him with 14 points this past week, and given his dynasty cost as running back 40, I think that's pretty good value, especially if you're a team that needs an RB3, again, a flex, somebody to fill in on bye weeks. If you're a contending team, this is a player that I would like to go after because he's getting the volume, and volume is king in fantasy football, especially when you're only looking in the relative short term. So Devin Singletary, the next running back buy on my list. All right, next up, as we move further down the list, now we're getting a little bit deeper. So we're talking guys that, you are not going to be plugging into your starting lineup in all likelihood unless you have to, but could be some nice depth and or bye week fill-ins. And so next up is Gus Edwards, running back for the LA Chargers, and he's running back 60 on Keep Trade Cut, 202 overall, and Edwards has actually gotten pretty substantial volume, even though he is hovering just under 50% in terms of snap share in this backfield. J.K. Dobbins has all the attention right now, as he should, but that's also caused Gus Edwards' value to really tank because there were, it was a big question mark, this backfield entering the season. But Edwards has shown that he can be a pretty serviceable running back, probably better in real life than fantasy. And so I do want to caution you on this. Do not overspend for Gus Edwards because he is more of a touchdown or bust type of player because he doesn't catch passes. However, if Dobbins does ever get hurt, which we've seen even when he does play well, those injuries just seem to find him. So Edwards will definitely have a big workload should that happen. So, he had a bunch of carries last week, and I think we're going to continue to see that. He's probably going to get some goal line carries. So touchdown dependent, but he does have some, contingent upside with a Dobbins injury. I think you can pour one out for my boy Kamani Vidal, who hasn't played. So, bit of a rough one there. However, Gus Edwards, a nice, very buy low, candidate here that I don't think will cost you much of anything to acquire. And last but not least is a player that probably was picked up on waivers in a lot of leagues, or at least was just picked up a couple weeks ago when he signed with Kansas City, and that's Samaje Perine. Running back 69 on Keep Trade Cut, 226 overall, and I think that Carson Steele is probably going to have, the more substantial role in this offense, at least to start off, because he's going to be more of that early down running back and will almost certainly be the goal line back. However, Samaje Perine might end up with an easier path to fantasy value because of his pass catching ability. So the Chiefs have done this in the past. We've seen guys like Jerick McKinnon really explode and have good, strong performances for fantasy. So I could see something like that happening again with Perine, especially as he continues to get more involved in the offense. I do expect Kansas City to throw more. I'm really not worried about Kareem Hunt. I think he'll just be kind of a depth piece. He'll get a few carries and whatnot, but I don't expect Kareem Hunt to really become a starter or anything like that. I think he's going to be the third running back in this pecking order. But Steele, you're probably not going to be able to trade for right now for at least, or have it feel like a discount because everyone is so excited about him. However, Samaje Perine, I think, will cost you less, and he's probably a better target to get those. He's going to be out there on third downs, 2-minute drill, things like that, and gives you a nice solid floor because of that receiving work. All right. So, wide receivers. This has been a bit of a tough position because I think that there are a lot of players that are underperforming here. And so I don't know that any of these players would really qualify as someone that, has played well through the first 2 weeks and that you're acquiring them because they can be a cheap contributor. These are players that I think are a bit more boom bust, a true buy low, target. So they really fit that buy low description of guys that just haven't been that good. So starting off with the high end value players in this list, the first two are actually back-to-back on Keep Trade Cut. So we'll start with Michael Pittman, wide receiver for the Colts. And he is wide receiver 34, 75th overall. And people are just panicking in the streets about Michael Pittman right now because he's been bad through 2 weeks. Anthony Richardson has been very inconsistent as a passer. Alec Pierce has had a really nice start to the season. Michael Pittman, not so much. But he does have 7 catches, and more importantly, he does have 15 targets. So this is something where I think you might be able to get Michael Pittman for a second-round pick, and I think that Pittman will be better as the season goes on, especially as Richardson starts to improve a little bit more as a passer. They just need a few weeks to get some chemistry going, iron things out. It's going to be a bit of a bumpy ride because that's just the type of player that Richardson is. This is not a Kirk Cousins, Matt Stafford, just consistent passer type of guy. This is going to be a much more, up and down wild ride because he's so dynamic in terms of running the ball and whatnot. And he was never that good of a passer in college, but so there is some considerable risk with Michael Pittman because if Richardson just doesn't ever develop as a passer, it's going to be a bit of a rough situation for him. Especially since he's not quite the same deep threat as somebody like Alec Pierce. But I still believe, and I think given that the cost has declined a pretty significant amount, I think it's worth it at this point. It's worth the risk. Next up is Jordan Addison, who's wide receiver 35 and number 76 overall of all players. And he was a sell for a lot of people in the offseason. And now pair that with an ankle injury that's knocked him out, missed week 2. He missed a bunch of time after suffering the injury in week 1. It seems like he might be back in week 3. Certainly it seems likely by week 4, but Sam Darnold has been impressive. We mentioned that when talking about J.J. McCarthy, and T.J. Hawkinson is still out. So there's room for a player like Addison to make an impact in this offense when he returns. He did catch a few passes in week 1 before, injuring his ankle. So I think at a wide receiver 35 type of cost, again, you can probably get him for a second round pick. And, that's a nice discount compared to where he was drafted by the team that likely has him, who probably spent, the 107, 108, 109 on him a couple years ago. So if you can get him for a second, same with Pittman, you might have to add, a smaller piece or something with that. But I think it could be a worthwhile target as long as you're not giving up a first-round pick. He's going to be the clear wide receiver 2 in this offense, and he's still got the youth, the age is on his side. And again, I do believe in J.J. McCarthy when he returns in 2025, so I do think the future is pretty bright for the Minnesota wide receivers. Next up is a player that I have talked a lot about because he's been one of my favorite players to target. Unfortunately, he has been dreadful, and that is Green Bay Packers wide receiver Christian Watson, wide receiver 45, 110th overall, and his value probably can't go too much lower right now unless he just completely fades away into fantasy irrelevance. But I don't see that happening. I think Jordan Love being out has really hurt him. No points in week 2 with Malik Willis, who is, a very subpar passer. So I don't think that Christian Watson really has any value until Jordan Love returns. But it doesn't seem like that's going to be all that far off. I think there's an outside shot even for week 3 that he returns. But week 4, week 5, I think certainly more in the cards. And so this is probably the lowest point for Christian Watson. And you can probably get him for a nice discount compared to what he was going for before the season, which I think was probably a mid to early second. I think now you're probably talking a back of the second, a pair of thirds, something like that. I just don't think it's going to be all that much because he wasn't really all that impactful in week 1 with Jordan Love. And so that I think scared some people. And then, there is still the injury risk and whatnot. So definitely a boom bust type of player. But if the cost just continues to drop while Jordan Love is out, I think now is the best time to try to get him because once Love returns, the huge discount probably is going to go away. So now's your chance. And that is what makes Christian Watson a buy low target. Next up is another player that I, really was excited for, and it's Christian Kirk of the Jacksonville Jaguars, wide receiver 54, 133 overall, and he just flat out has not gotten it done. This Jacksonville offense has been terrible. I really liked Trevor Lawrence. I liked Evan Engram, Christian Kirk. I thought this offense would be very good, and it has not. So it's a bit difficult, to figure out what to do with a guy like Christian Kirk, but I don't believe that the offense will stay as bad as it's been through 2 weeks, and I certainly don't think that Christian Kirk is just going to turn into this one catch a game player that he's been. So, but because of his age and then the inconsistency with this offense, I think that, it's really not going to cost you much. It'll cost you less than Christian Watson. And if you have had some injuries, you need to take a chance on somebody. If you are going to go after a wide receiver that you think has 2 good years and, you want to be able to get some solid production from, those players are not going to come cheap to you. I mean, you're talking having to give up second-round pick, first-round picks, high-level bench players, young players, things like that. Christian Kirk is just not, at the moment, doesn't carry the same value that he did in the offseason. So he's a player that I have in multiple leagues. I'm going to be holding on to him because I do believe that he will bounce back. Maybe he doesn't end up in that top 20, top 24 range that I had really been hoping for at the beginning of the season. But I do think that he can produce and be a solid weekly contributor for fantasy. And so at wide receiver 54, I think that makes him a good buy low target. All right. Last but not least at the wide receiver position is going to be rookie wide receiver Roman Wilson of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Wide receiver 71, 170th overall. And Wilson hasn't played yet this season because of an injury. It seems like he's back at practice. and that there's a chance he returns this week, but probably week 4. And so now is kind of your last chance to get him for less than where he was drafted before he steps on the field and more than likely turns into the wide receiver 2 for the Pittsburgh Steelers, which, for now has been a combination of Calvin Austin and Van Jefferson. And, it's just not a great situation at the second wide receiver spot behind George Pickens. So playing time is going to be there, up for grabs. I do believe that Roman Wilson is more talented than those other players, so I expect him to be on the field a good amount once he is healthy. So I think in a lot of leagues, again, we're talking probably an early third-round pick in your rookie drafts, somebody at that 2-3 turn. I think that you can get him for a third, and this is an opportunity for you to sort of capitalize on a small dip in value for a rookie that still I think has a pretty high ceiling and is somebody that I liked I liked him a lot at the 2-3 turn in my rookie drafts. I do have him in a couple leagues, so I think this is a good opportunity for you to get him now if you were unable to snag him in your rookie draft. All right, tight ends. Last but not least, 5 players. This has been a really bad position for fantasy football so far. We've talked a lot about the elite tight ends, and there's a big group now at the top, and Trey McBride, Sam Laporta, Kelsey, Andrews, Bowers, Pitts, Kincaid, all these players. They've pretty much all been disappointing outside of Trey McBride and Brock Bowers, and probably the biggest disappointment of that group has been Travis Kelsey, who is the first player on my buy low target list. And so he's tight end 10 overall in keep trade cut, 105th overall with all the other players. And he's been a big disappointment. There's no downplaying that. However, he's been playing 90% of the snaps. I fully expect him to bounce back. We're talking about one of the greatest tight ends of all time. You can order them however way you want. At the top, he certainly is in that top 3, top 5 at the position. So I'd expect the Chiefs to throw the ball more with Isaiah Pacheco out due to injury, which is just so unfortunate. I didn't mention this earlier when we discussed Samaje Perine, but Pacheco was one of my guys for this year. I really thought he was going to be a top 10 running back. He was off to a great start, so very unfortunate there as he misses the next 2 months. But Travis Kelsey is going to have to step up. And we saw last year a bit where Travis Kelsey would kind of disappear for a week or two, but then he just really bounced back in the playoffs, had some great games. He was still producing at a high level throughout a large chunk of the regular season, even if it wasn't to sort of the same standard that we were used to. But if you're in a tight end premium league, he's going to be, involved moving forward. I absolutely refuse to believe that Travis Kelsey is going to somehow disappear from the Chiefs offense, given the connection that he and Patrick Mahomes have. So tight end 10, I think, is pretty good value. There is very high risk here with the possibility that he could retire at the end of the season. So I do want to caution you on that if you're looking to trade for him, because again, I just went out and traded for him in a league where I think I'm a contender. I did not have to give up a ton for him. I gave up a 3rd-round pick and 2 4th-round picks because, again, it's a situation where, the manager that had him, team was off to a rough start, was kicking off a rebuild, was trading away vets. And so, given the risk of retirement and just the poor play in general, you might be able to do the same if you're a contender in your leagues, go out and try to snag him. So, Travis Kelsey, the first buy low target at the tight end position. Next up is Evan Engram of the Jacksonville Jaguars. So we mentioned Christian Kirk earlier. Evan Engram kind of belongs in that same category. Just player that I really felt strongly about entering the season, but didn't do much in week 1 and then injured his hamstring in pregame warmups ahead of week 2, which really affected a number of my teams, unfortunately. But I think this is a good buy low opportunity for a lot of teams, but if you're a contender that has, a high level starter that maybe has been off to a slow start and you want to solidify your position by, snagging a higher end tight end 2, I think this is a perfect guy to go target. Or if you've just had other injuries at the position, David Njoku, things like that, and you have enough to get by in the short term, but you want somebody to help you out more long term over the course of the season. I think Engram can be that guy. Whenever players get injured, there's always going to be some sort of discount in a trade. So now is the time. I do not expect his cost to get much lower than it will be right now. So Evan Engram, tight end, the second tight end on this list. All right, so next up we have three guys that I think truly fit more into the cheap, just not somebody that you have to spend a lot on to acquire. So a cheap trade target, Tucker Kraft, Green Bay Packers, starting tight end for the Green Bay Packers. And he's tight end 18 on keep trade cut, 174th overall. He played 76% of snaps in week 1, 80% in week 2. He is the tight end 1 in Green Bay as long as he's healthy. So I saw, again, that he was limited in practice. He's got some injuries popping up. So pay attention to that. Check in on that if he's on your team or if you're looking to make a move for him. But even though he's had a good start to the season in terms of snaps, he hasn't produced a lot because, Malik Willis and, that certainly doesn't help things. But I think the playing time matters more here. And so the cost is still very low to acquire somebody that carries a tight end 18 evaluation. So Tucker Kraft, I've talked about him a ton on this show, so I'm not going to go too much in depth here, but he is the third tight end on this list as somebody to buy low. Fourth on the list is Greg Dulcich, tight end of the Denver Broncos. And this is someone that I was interested in the offseason. I recommended going out, moving a 4th-round pick for him. I think you can probably still make that trade for a 4th, or at least for some, bench piece, because he's being valued as the tight end 25, 205th overall, and he's clearly the Broncos' number 1 tight end. He's gotten 11 targets so far this season. Bo Nix has struggled a bit, as really all the rookie quarterbacks have, but I like what I've seen in terms of his involvement. He's been playing more than 50% of the snaps. So it's not, as I would prefer Tucker Kraft, which, the community does as well, given their, price tags at tight end 18 versus 25. But if you're looking for just a very cheap dart throw that is somebody that you actually might be able to plug into your lineups at some point this year, I think Dulcich fits that category and is a nice buy low or buy cheap target. And last but not least, rounding out this show, we have another rookie who also spent the majority of his career at the University of Michigan, and that is tight end Eric All of the Cincinnati Bengals. Tight end 34 on keep trade cut, 240 overall. And this is a player that was likely going at the back end of the 4th round in your rookie drafts, maybe was a free agent pickup, probably more of a priority free agent in a lot of leagues. I was able to get him a few places that way. But this is a guy that, we didn't really expect to see a lot of early in the season. And yet all of a sudden in week 2, his snap share rose above 50%. He caught 4 passes. He was highly involved in the Bengals offense against the Kansas City Chiefs. So it seems to me that Eric All is quickly earning the trust of Joe Burrow. There's a place for him in this offense. Mike Gesicki is, the main competition, but there's room in this passing game, especially with T. Higgins being out and kind of a slow start to the season for Jamar Chase. So Eric All, somebody that you can get for a 4th-round pick almost for sure, and I think he makes a great buy low, cheap trade target right now at this point in the season. So there you have it. We have 5 players at each position. So quarterback, we had Jared Goff, J.J. McCarthy, Tua Tagovailoa, Justin Fields, and Deshaun Watson. Running backs, we had Tony Pollard, Bucky Irving, Devin Singletary, Gus Edwards, and Samaje Perine. And then wide receivers, Michael Pittman, Jordan Addison, Christian Watson, Christian Kirk, and Roman Wilson. And then at tight end, we had Travis Kelce, Evan Engram, Tucker Kraft, Greg Dulcich, and Eric All. So there you have it. 20 names to keep an eye on as buy low trade targets. as we enter week 3. Thank you all very much for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode. Let me know if you have any questions that you want me to discuss on this show. It was a listener question that prompted this episode about buy low targets. They were particularly interested in running backs. So hopefully there's a name or two on this list today that they can go out and grab for their contending team. And let me know on Twitter or social media what other topics you want me to discuss moving forward. Again, that Twitter handle is at Dynasty War Room. So go follow us there, leave your questions and comments, and I'd love to hear from you. So with that being said, thank you all for listening, and we'll talk to you all next week.